Your car guy here. Today's project, a 2007 Nissan Altima. This one has a P0845 code. This code relates to the transmission circuit. So we focus in there. Transmission fluid pressure sensor circuit switch B. Now, did a little research on this code, and there is a service bulletin from Nissan that states if you have that code, and there's a couple other codes. I'll try to include a picture of the service bulletin at the end of the video here, that you need to replace the transmission valve body with an updated valve body. So that's what we're going to do today. Okay, so since we're doing the transmission valve body, I went ahead and I've raised the vehicle. I have it secured on jack stands. I have my wheels chalked for safety. The nice thing is the transmission pan is very accessible on these, as it is directly underneath. So we can see the pan is directly underneath, and that's what we're going to have to remove. We're going to drain the fluid. We have a drain plug here. I'm going to go ahead and remove that driver's side tire just for access. Once we drain the transmission, we'll be able to take all these perimeter bolts that run around here out for the pan. They have looks like a 10mm head, and shouldn't be too bad. Now, just because you've drained it, at least with the angle I've got this sitting at, there's going to be some extra fluid in the back there. So when I take that down, I want to make sure that I have a pan underneath for the extra fluid. And because it's a transmission, it's going to continue to drip while you're working on it. So just expect that. So the drain plug's out. It's a 19mm socket to remove the drain plug. I'm going to remove all the pan bolts, and not quite the light I'd like to see in here, but these 10mm bolts that run the perimeter of the pan. We'll remove all of those, and then we'll be ready to remove the transmission pan. All right, with our pan down, we can now see the bottom of the valve body. Things that we're going to remove first are our filter housing right here. Take those bolts out, and we'll be able to drop the filter. We also need to remove this nut here with this arm that goes to this shift rod. We'll be reusing that in our new valve body, so we'll need to take that nut off. Now, we don't have to take all these bolts off. What we're going to have to do is take off the ones that are pertinent to what we're doing. We also have an electrical connection over here and some wiring that'll need to be disconnected, and some of that's just pushed into a retainer clips to remove it once we unplug it. We do have one little zip tie plug there that we can remove as well, that'll just pull straight down in order to get at it. And then there's just certain bolts, and I'm going to show you which ones, that have to be removed to remove this entire valve body and bring it down. So, but first things first, let's go ahead and remove our filter and get this arm off right here. Next step is getting the electrical, and if you look at that green plug there on this end, there's a little tab that needs pushed in right on the green plug itself, and then it'll pull out towards the back of the car. Then there's also a tab that you can see just above the orange wire there that needs pushed in to remove that plug there. Then we can lower down all the electrical. Don't forget, we'll have to either pull out the one that's right here, that white gray. Let me see if I can position the light. So this one either needs to be pulled out, or you can remove these bolts to remove that bracket. And we'll need to transfer that bracket onto our other valve body, but it isn't necessary just for pulling it down. We can do that while we have it out. So we'll remove this plug by pulling it towards the back. After pushing on the tab, this plug is going to come straight down after pushing that little tab that's right there above my finger, and that'll get the electrical disconnected. We also remove these two bolts. That bracket there that helps mount the filter is going to go onto the new valve body. With our electrical disconnected, now we're going to remove the remaining bolts. We've got to remove, and I'll give you a view, this one and this one. these two right here in that corner towards the back, this one that's right behind this linkage bar, and this one, and on these 5 that run across the front of the valve body. After that, the valve body should drop straight down. All right, we have our old valve body out and our new valve body right next to it. It's really important to inspect all the items that are going to need to be moved between the 2 valve bodies. For starters, this rod here needs to come out and then simply be inserted into the new valve body. This is the shift rod. Just slide it in like that. A few other things that you'll see right away. You have a sensor here that needs to be unbolted, and it'll go on right here. You also have a bushing for the shift rod that's going to need to come out there and be inserted right here. Let's take a look at the top. And as we're inspecting this, we see we're going to need to take this rod right here, and it just simply slides out, and then slide it right back into your new valve body. By doing this with them side by side, you keep from making mistakes that might cause you some headaches. Now, if you look at that rod, you'll see that it goes up underneath that solenoid into there, right there. So you see how that is? It's going to slide right in, just like that. And when we install it, you'll need to watch to make sure this is in the position going up to catch the lever it's supposed to catch. Before I get too much farther, I want to notice something that I had failed to mention. There is a spring that came out underneath of this that needs to go back in. So just set it up, drop your spring in, get your rod back installed, line it up to the solenoid there, and back in place you go. And you should be in good shape. And that spring will settle right into where it's supposed to ride. Don't forget, we do need to move over our sensor here. We'll knock that out, and then we'll be ready to install. Okay, we've switched this sensor over to the valve body, and you're probably wondering, how am I going to get that to stay down in while I'm trying to insert it up in there and get it to line up with the pin that's on the transmission? Well, this is what you need. A small Allen wrench or even a small straight screwdriver. Somebody had to assemble this at the factory, and the factory's put together ways to make it work. So what you're going to do is you'll compress this down, and then you'll note right there is a channel. That channel comes all the way through from the bottom side of the valve body to where I can take my Allen wrench and stick it through, and it effectively makes a stop that's not going to allow that to pop out. That way I make sure I stay engaged here on the solenoid, and I'll be able to line that up. Because I've got an Allen wrench that'll slide back and forth as I go to install, it'll simply push it down as I put my valve body up, and then I can pull it out, no issues. So we're going to go ahead and insert the valve body very carefully. I did put the bushing in already in the bottom of the valve body for the what's the shift rod that it's going to go over. If that bushing falls out while you're putting it in, don't get too worried. You can simply shove it back up over that shift rod, so it's not that big a deal. So next, we're just going to take and we're going to stick our valve body up, and we'll get it started with a couple of bolts. All right, I've got my valve body up in place. I've put a couple of screws in or bolts in, just enough that they hold it up tight. I want it held up tight so that it doesn't drop down off that shift rod and that pop out, and then I have to pull it down and do it again. Now, as we're going to put everything in, you're going to note that there's 2 bolts that we took out that are mounting the valve body that are a little bit shorter than the rest. Okay, all the rest of the valve body mounting bolts are the same, but these 2 shorter ones in case you get lost, I'll show you. In case you get lost, let me show you where they go. If you look at all your mounting bolts, they're about the same, but you'll see we have one that's in what I would call a depression here, and then you have another one at the front, or I say the back is what I should say, that's in a depression as well. Those are for your two shorter bolts. Okay, now that I've got the valve body remounted, I can install my bracket that goes right here. That's this bracket for mounting my filter. I can also now mount this wire clip. What I'm going to do is take out these 3 bolts, and make sure, watch, because they may have varying lengths, so pay attention when you pull them out, and put the same one back in the same hole, but remount the electrical and plug in both our main harness and our sensor here at the back. So we'll get those mounted. We'll also be able to put our arm on our shift linkage here and get it mounted. Okay, we have everything mounted back up. I'll get some light. Our electrical's plugged back in, and it's tied back into all of the clips to keep it from moving around. We have our shift lever reinstalled. We got our bracket for the back of the filter. Notice with that one short bolt we left out because that's one of the filter bolts, and then you have the 2 short bolts that mount it, one there and one here at the back. So now it's time you put in your new filter, install it, and then simply install your pan with all your pan bolts. Please make sure that you torque all your bolts properly, and that you make sure you tighten the drain plug on your pan. Don't forget that. It'd be terrible to do all this work and then let it drain all the fluid out and burn up your transmission. So don't forget to torque that drain plug when you put it together. Before you put in your new filter, make sure you have your O-ring installed right on the neck. Then you're just going to shove that up, bolt it in. Also, it's a good idea to clean out the pan. I've already cleaned this one out, just to make sure there's no debris or anything left in. There wasn't much as far as any kind of foreign material that would make me worry about the transmission being bad. No chunks of metal, and not a lot of clutch wear material that I would normally see. So that's a good sign that our transmission's still in decent shape, and hopefully this new valve body is going to fix that problem with that code that puts it into a D rate and allow this to perform properly as per the Nissan bulletin. Okay, all our bolts are back in and torqued. We've torqued our drain plug. The next step now is to go ahead and fill it up with fluid and clear our code and test drive the vehicle to make sure that everything's working correctly. Make sure you're using the correct CVT transmission fluid. This is a CVT, or a continuously variable transmission. And fill it to the manufacturer's specified mark. I'll show you the dipstick and where that's at and how to do all that here in just a minute. Also, just a note, this isn't a really difficult job, but it is a very messy job. So just be aware that when you pull the pan, more fluid comes out, even though you've drained it. When you pull the filter, more fluid comes out, even though you've drained it. And when you release the valve body, a lot more fluid comes out, even though it's been drained. So that's why you keep your pan underneath it during each time, or you see I've used absorbent mats as well, just so that if I need to move my pan, I can take the constant dripping that's going to happen of fluid while you work. So next step, let's get her filled up and test it. Okay, now that we've finished putting everything back together underneath, it's time to add fluid. I did take off, there's an air intake piece right here, so I could get a better view of the dipstick to show you, because there is a lock right there, that tab that sits right in the center. Has to be pulled towards the center of the dipstick in order to pull it up. And if this thing hasn't been out in a long time, it's going to be stiff. You'll have to work it a little bit, wiggle it. When you go to put it back in, if you put a little bit of oil on this O-ring or transmission fluid, it'll help keep it from being so difficult to remove next time. Per the bulletin, we're going to add 8 quarts of fluid. We'll then run it up to temp and we'll check it. So
So we finished installing the valve body. We test drove it with the fluids. Everything ran great, cleared our code, took care of our issues. So it wasn't all that bad to do. Just make sure that you are very careful when you put it together to line up with using the Allen wrench as a pin to line up the range selector, and you should be good. This is your car guy. Please don't forget to like and share our videos and subscribe to the channel. Help us grow.